G'day, welcome to Bradley's Bakehouse, where today we're going to be making a sourdough, but we're going to be doing it a little bit differently. I've done sourdough previously on this channel, but the last time I did a mixer, and I did one where we baked it on a baking steel using like a steam injection method, and I did the other one in a Dutch oven. Today, I'm going to assume that you don't have any of that stuff. I'm going to assume that you've got a sheet pan, a mixing bowl, some culture, and a dream. And we're going to make this work. This is going to be minimalist sourdough. Because I'm going to assume that you're quite early on in the stage of learning how to make sourdough or, naturally leavened breads and stuff like that, we're going to include a schedule in this one too. So last time I kind of just, it is a recipe assuming that you have a working culture and you understand how like peaking works and when to use your culture and when it's like active and ready to go and stuff like that. We're going to step things back a little bit with this one. This is my main culture right here. It's called Rye Montgomery, after New Zealand comedian Guy Montgomery. It's a 50% rye, 50% white flour, 100% hydration culture. This is generally the thing that I have been using lately. I've got a lot of results out of it that I've really enjoyed, and it's what I'm going to be using for this video. So if we were to break this down into a 3-day process, the first thing that we have to do on day one, easiest day, we just have to do our Levain Build, which is basically we need to take some of our starter, we need to give it some food, and we need to get it fermenting and get it to a point where it's peaking, where we want it to peak so we can use it in our bread, right? So this is the first task of day one. It's about 9 p.m. now. I'm just about to go to bed. So we're gonna mix that and we're gonna get that one going. Okay, so our levain is going to contain all of the wild yeast and all of the stuff that's it's going to consume the simple sugars within the flour and stuff like that, and it's going to create CO2, which is what's going to give our bread rise. Super crucial part of what makes sourdough is it being wild yeast, which has been cultivated. Now, I've had this culture for a long time. I feed it regularly enough that it's not dead. I really like it. 50% rye, 50% bread flour. I really like the flavor that imparts. You could probably use any combination that you wanted. This is just what I like. You don't have to do what I like, but I've had good results. You might do as well. What we're gonna do now to build our levain is we're gonna take a tiny bit of this and we're gonna give it some fresh flour and some fresh water, and we're gonna let it eat its way through that overnight. We're gonna let those bacteria multiply, and then we're gonna put that into our bread dough after it's fermented for a good period of time and it's ready to go. All of the exact measurements for everything you can find down in the description below. Some stats for the nerds. This is an inoculation rate of 1 to 5 to 5. So that would mean for every 10 grams, hypothetically speaking, of starter that we're gonna use 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water, 100% hydration, same amount of water that there is flour. Ipso facto, sourdough culture. So I need 7 grams of this, because we need about 80 grams of our levain all up, 7.8, that'll be fine. Now the first thing that I like to mix in is my water. I live in Queensland, Australia, where it is currently 27 degrees at about 10 to 9 in the evening. That's Celsius. So I use fridge cold water because if I use tepid water, this thing would just explode and go nuts. And we don't want that. We want to be able to control this. We want to have control over our fermentation period. That's really important. So into this is going to go 36 grams cold water. And I like to add the water first because it's very easy to disperse this culture amongst this water. You can get that culture all dispersed throughout there. Cool. So now we need to start adding our flours. Now, the original culture build is 50% rye and 50% white. For this particular levain, I'm going 50% white and 50% whole wheat, right? So this is just some quite high quality wholemeal flour, I won't lie. It's organic and stone ground and stuff. I need 18 grams of this, and these are going in equal parts, and 18 grams of white flour as well. Nailed it. And then this is just gonna get mixed up. Now the combination of the wholemeal and the white flour, entirely taste. I think it tastes good. I think those two things together, I don't know, I've done this experiment. I've used spelt, I've used emmer, I've used rye, I've used all sorts of things. I really like the combination of white and wholemeal for this stage of the application. We are gonna use white and wholemeal when we make the actual dough, but I think having the pre-fermented wholemeal in there as well, I think just adds like a really beautiful sort of, just a beautiful bit of depth that I think is really important in this. You're making sourdough because you want something that's a bit more complicated than regular bread, right? You may as well go all out with it. But that being said, you know, there's millions of variables at play with all of this stuff. Your flour will be different, your water will be different, your culture will be different. So much of this is experimentation, and I think that's why so many people have such a maddening time trying to teach it, because so much of this is like, you just got to get in and see how it's going to work in your kitchen with your stuff, you know? I've made hundreds of these now, and I've made them in like both commercial bakery and like domestic situation, and like, this is just the fruits of me fucking up a bunch of sourdoughs over the years, you know? Okay, so that is good to go. Now, I strongly recommend either getting a marker or getting something like a hair tie and putting it on there and just going to where the culture comes up just as you've mixed it, right? What we need this to do now is we need it to do what's called peaking. So basically, that culture has been fed a ton of like fresh flour. There's lots of really nice simple sugars in there for it to eat. It's gonna eat and it's gonna multiply, and we're gonna get a higher bacterial load. But at a certain point, that yeast is gonna run out of food and it's gonna start to decline. We wanna catch it at its, you know, peak. That being said, don't overthink that. Like, you'll see people throw culture out because they missed the theoretical peak by like half an hour. Don't overthink it. You'll bake it anyway. Bake it anyway. So I'm gonna go to bed now. I'm not gonna touch this again for about another 9 hours or so. We're working off a schedule here, right? So this is day 1 and this is 9 p.m, right before we go to bed. We've mixed our levain, right? Tomorrow morning at around 8 a.m, we're gonna start mixing our dough. This is like a really great, you've got a day off project. That being said, people work shift work, I work shift work. Once you sort of figure out how the schedule works, you can sort of tailor it to how you wanna make bread and how often you wanna make bread in particular. But as far as it stands for now, day 1 is finished. Good night. Also, don't fucking tighten your lid. Don't do that. It can explode. I've seen them explode. Don't, just put it on. You're good. Don't worry about it. Good morning. So it's about 7 a.m. and we're gonna get started with the nitty gritty of actually making our dough. So as we can see, our culture, our levain, has done its thing. You can see where the hair tie was. You can see how we've doubled in size. There's no weird streaks down the side, so it hasn't started quite declining yet, but we know there's gonna be like a really good bacterial load. We know that's gonna be really good to get going. If you get to the stage where there are sort of streaks down the side of the jar where the culture has clearly risen and then started to fall, make the bread anyway. Unless you're seriously past it and it returns to where the hair tie was, it's like, just make the bread anyway. Don't overthink it. That's the number one thing that will get in your way from turning this into a thing that you enjoy doing and a thing that you like doing, is if you overthink it and you just ruin your life with like logistics. Just make the bread anyway. That probably took about 10 hours. Again, my culture, my water, my flour. Your results may vary. It might come up quicker, it might come up slower. It's just a trial and error thing. You just got to get used to your environment. Okay, so making our dough. Now, this dough is going to be 90% white, 10% wholemeal. That's a pretty standard thing as far as I know. I personally think that all sourdoughs need a little bit of some kind of wholemeal, whether it's, you know, this is just wheat wholemeal that we're gonna be using today, but like whether it's spelt or emmer or rye or something, I think they just need like a little bit of that just for like a little bit of depth, and really particularly for like texture. I think that really hammers home like the toothsome nuttiness of what a modern sourdough loaf is trying to achieve. These flours are both organic stone ground. They're very fancy. I have made sourdough on this channel previously just using supermarket flours, and I would absolutely recommend just using supermarket flours until you're like comfortable enough that you're willing to spring for the expensive flours. You will notice a difference in taste and like handleability depending on protein content, of course. Protein content's kind of the magical number on this, but I would say just go buy a box of Lighthouse flour if you're in Australia, or like that Wallaby flour. I used that stuff for a really long time, especially when I was like sort of learning chops in like a home environment, because doing this sort of thing at home is very different to doing it in a commercial bakery when you've got like a big dog spiral mixer and gluten development is like not a factor that you need to really consider, because the mixer is going to do a ton of the work and you're doing these huge batches that bulk ferment really quickly because they've got a higher thermal mass. We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here. Let's mix the fucking dough. So one thing that I would recommend that everybody get is like a decent digital scale. This is a really fancy coffee one. It's accurate to 0.1 of a gram. While that's nice, I would say that you don't necessarily need something like that, but using a digital scale and moving to grams, especially instead of like tablespoons and cups and shit like that, you will notice such a vast improvement in the quality of the things that you make, and also repeatability. Like, flour is one of the most packable substances in the kitchen. You know, a cup of flour can range wildly in weight. So just get a digital scale. You'll be much happier for it, I promise. It's gonna be a good investment, especially because like even this fancy one I think was like 60 bucks Australian, which is like $2 USD. Now we're only doing 10% wholemeal on this one, so only ends up being like 36 grams. So I just want to get rid of this because it looks kind of tacky in a container like that, you know. Cool. So that's the wholemeal in there. Get your white in there. That's way too much, brother. So that's our flour in there. I'm just gonna give that a quick dry mix with my hand. It's kind of a formality at this point. It's gonna get plenty mixed up when we're kneading and shit like that, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that. I'm back on the cold water again because it's 7:15 in the morning and it's 26 degrees with a high of 36. That's gonna be fun. Fermentation, you know, it likes a warm environment, but we wanna have a degree of control over that, and varying a temperature of our water is probably the most basic and kind of the most repeatable way to do it. I know my fridge is running at 4 degrees. So now we're gonna add our water to this. This sourdough is gonna be 70% hydration, right? Now, as far as sourdough on the internet goes, that's relatively moderate, right? Some incredibly macho bakers will go to 80, 85, even 90%. I don't personally feel that you need to do that. I think there's a little bit of a pervasive idea that more water equals more good. I would advise most people to start even at like 65%, but we're gonna do 70 today. That's kind of how I was taught. I was taught using 70% recipes in terms of like shaping and stuff like that. So that's what we're gonna go with. But here's the trick. We're only gonna add 65% of our water now because we're gonna utilize a French technique called bassionnage. One of the main hurdles that we need to get over doing this is developing gluten, right? We need to build a strong gluten matrix. It's gonna act kind of a bit like a net, and it's gonna capture all the gas that our nice wild yeast produces, and it's gonna cause the bread to rise, right? Gluten will develop better in a lower hydration environment. What we're about to do now is a technique called Autolyse, right? So we're gonna add our water in. In we go. So that's 65% of our water. We're gonna do 70% total, right? So there's still another 5% to go in. I'm just gonna mix this. I'm gonna use my hand because I'm apparently committing to the no equipment thing. You can use a spoon, you can use a rubber spatula. If you've got a dough whisk, I've got one somewhere. You can use that. I'm just gonna use my hand because I'm just gonna commit to the bit on this one. The goal of this mix here, this is just a really early mix. The goal of this is just to get all of the flour hydrated. So we're just gonna try and get this into like a big shaggy mass, and see how when you pick it up, there's like stuff on the bottom? We don't want those dregs. Expose some areas of wet, get all that flour on there. We want nice clean sides on the bowl. One fun trick, if you grab your little dough mass, just rub it on the sides and you get the rest of that flour off there, see? Get it all off there. Now, what this Autolyse technique is going to do is, we're gonna cover this and we're gonna leave it for about an hour. During that hour, some pretty cool chemical enzymic bullshit is gonna start kicking off. Our flour is gonna fully hydrate and it's gonna start developing a gluten matrix on its own. The Autolyse technique is, I would say, for modern sourdough, I would say it's almost crucial in that it is just so common that I think we associate a really good sourdough with like a decent Autolyse period because it's just water and flour. No fermentation is occurring right now. We haven't added our yeast, we haven't added any culture. This is going to affect the texture of the dough. This is going to affect like the mouthfeel, and it's going to affect the crumb. I like an hour-long Autolyse personally. I think you hit the point of diminishing returns pretty hard after that. I've heard tales of people doing 24-hour Autolyses, like Autolyses overnight in the fridge and stuff like that. I personally like the hour-long Autolyse. So right now, do you see how if I try to like pull this, it just rips, right? Like it's just a big shaggy mass. It just rips. The gluten development hasn't really occurred yet. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna cover this with a sheet pan, and we're gonna come back in an hour and we're gonna observe the change in the texture because it's pretty mind-blowing what just like an hour of leaving this untouched is gonna do. Okay, so it's been an hour of Autolysing, and as we can see with this dough, where it was just a shaggy mess that would just rip if we tried to pull it, now it's got a little bit of elasticity, right? So that's our gluten beginning to form. And that's a very important part of this process, right? Don't skip the Autolyse, especially if you're hand kneading, because hand kneading can be a bit vigorous, and having that extra little bit of gluten to start off with before we even hit the kneading process is a really good position to be in. Now there's a couple things that we need to measure out. We've got our culture. Now, ooh, that's okay. We've got our culture here. I know that we're gonna need to use all of this because I weighed it out previously, right? Throw that on the scale. We need our other 5% of water. What I'm gonna do is our last 5% of water, I'm gonna weigh it into the vessel that's holding our culture because I want it to be evenly dispersed, right? That's gonna be a big part of what we're doing now is we're gonna disperse the culture amongst the dough that we've already made here. So it's about 18 grams of water for this recipe. And that's just our last 5%. Remember, like I said, gluten will form better in a lower hydration environment. So we let that autolyse happen at a lower hydration environment, and then we add the last of our water after we've already established some gluten. So we've got those together. The other thing that we need to weigh out is our salt, and we're gonna weigh out this one separately. This recipe is 2.5% salt. You need to add salt because salt makes things taste good. If you don't add salt, things aren't gonna taste good. Salt also has the added benefit of controlling our fermentation a little bit. So, culture with our last 5% of water. I know it doesn't seem like much, but believe it or not, it is actually gonna have quite a bit of an impact adding it afterwards. Just got this, we're just gonna mix this around so it's a little bit dispersed, and then we're just gonna pour that over the top of our dough. One hand, right? We're gonna use a grabbing motion to sort of bring this all together. It's gonna feel gross, but you'll learn to like the feeling of it. And I'm sort of just grabbing it and just spinning it around, and that's just gonna get that dough nice and inoculated with our culture and that other 5% of water. It's gonna seem like a bit of a mess. As you can see, this doesn't look like the most appetizing thing in the world right now, but trust me, it's gonna come together over the course of kneading and bulk fermenting. It's all gonna come together and be really good. Flip it around, just get it all in there, get it all nice and worked in. Don't be gentle with it, you don't need to be gentle with it. So we sort of got that kind of mass there. I know it's trailing along the sides of the bowl, don't worry too much about it. Like I said, don't overthink any of this. In goes the salt, just on top, like that. Same sort of motion. We wanna get that salt evenly dispersed, so we're gonna beat it up a little bit like this. All the ingredients are in there. That's all the ingredients that we're gonna be adding to this sourdough. It's a very simple recipe. So what we need to do now, if we were to think about making dough in 2 stages, right? So we've got a mixing phase where all the ingredients are being combined. We've just completed that. We've now got a kneading phase where we need to use some agitation and some kinetic energy to form our nice gluten matrix, which is gonna capture all that gas, right? We've had a little bit of a head start with that, the autolyse. We've had a little bit of a head start of that with the bassionnage. Now we need to put in some elbow work and do it properly. So what I like to do here is I'll either put like a song on that's like a specific length. We're gonna be working this for about 5 minutes. Or in this instance, I have a timer on my scale. I'm probably just gonna use that. We're gonna do 2.5 minutes of kneading with one method and 2.5 minutes of kneading with a different method. I'll show you both of those now. So our first method, our hand, our very doughy hand, remember we wanna keep one hand clean and we wanna keep one hand doughy. That's generally what we wanna go with right now. We're gonna make a little scoop, we're gonna go underneath and we're gonna let it fall back down onto the bowl, right? So underneath, fall back down, right? See? See that kind of method there? Do a little bit faster. That's our first method of kneading. This is a very gentle method of kneading and it's very good for when the dough is still wet and sticky like this. So we're gonna do that for about 2 minutes, I would say. 2 minutes or so. Put a podcast on, put a YouTube video on, ask yourself how you are, listen to an audiobook. And you can already see how it's like smoothing out on top. Can you see that there? How it's like smoothing out? That's what we want. We want nice, smooth top. We don't want it, we're gonna get rid of all these wrinkles by the end of this. By the end of this, we're gonna have a nice, smooth mass of dough. So give it a working, wait till it gets like quite long and then turn. Turn 90 degrees, do it some more. You can go really fast if you want. I'm trying to stop the bowl from, is that gonna get shit all over my shirt? No, we're good. See? There we go, just like that. And you can see it's, as the gluten gets stronger, it's gonna pick up that shit from the side of the bowl. If you do this a few times, you'll sort of start to learn about like dough strength. And a stronger dough, you'll be able to feel it under your fingertips. Like I can feel this strengthening. See how it's like stretching and it like wants to stay as one mass. The dough is getting stronger. That's 2.5 minutes of our first method of kneading. As you can see, our dough is becoming very stretchy, Very nice. We're definitely getting there. Gluten's definitely developing. Our second method of kneading is called a slap and fold. It's a bit more barbaric. Pick your dough up. You can do it, throw it down, fold it over itself, right? Then rotate 90 degrees, down, throw it down, fold it on itself. And what this is doing is it's gonna cross our strands of gluten and it's gonna make that net. But as you can see, as I'm picking it up, it's already staying in one piece. Before, remember, this was just like a shaggy mess that barely stayed together and didn't have any stretch at all. But now she's staying together. That's exactly what we want, right? This is looking really good. As you can see, the top is starting to smooth over now too, right? It's not all wrinkly and shit anymore. It's starting to smooth over and become taut. If you have a small mass like this, you can do it all in the bowl, save your bench top. If I'm used doing more than a kilo, I'll just throw it on the bench and just scrape it off later. Just get a couple more in there at the end. Okay, so we finished kneading our dough. As you can see, it's still a bit shaggy, but it's definitely forming one mass. It's got a quality of smoothness to it. It's jiggly, it's stretchy, it's got some elasticity. Now, we're going to move into our bulk ferment phase, which is basically the culture is going to do its work. It's going to consume those simple sugars. We're going to develop a ton of flavor and we're going to develop the gas that we need. During that bulk ferment phase, we need to do a couple of what's called folds, which is basically just another method of strengthening gluten. And it's going to have a few other benefits as well. As that yeast feeds, it's going to start exhausting its food supply. If we fold it, what we're doing is we're redistributing the yeast and giving it access to a new food supply so it can continue to feed vigorously and create those gases that we need. That step can't really be skipped. So I'm going to show you how I keep track of the bulk ferment, and I'm going to show you how I keep track of the intervals in which to fold it using the timing app on my phone. Okay, so as we start our bulk ferment, the first thing that we're going to do is cover the dough because we really don't want that drying out. So we want to cover it. It doesn't necessarily need to be like a super airtight seal. Just keep the breeze off it, keep the draft off it, all that sort of stuff. Now, I know through experience and this recipe and my culture and stuff like that, that this bulk ferment is going to take about 4 hours, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set a collection of timers because I know that we need to do 2 stretch and folds, 2 coil folds, and then the full duration of our period, right? So first timer that I'm gonna set is for 4 hours. That is gonna be our bulk ferment timer. The second timer that I'm gonna set is 15 minutes from now. That's gonna be our first stretch and fold. So I'm gonna call that first stretch and fold. And then I'm gonna wanna do another stretch and fold 15 minutes after that. So I'm gonna set a timer for 30 minutes. So that's gonna be second stretch and fold. And then half an hour after that, we wanna do our first coil fold. So that's gonna be an hour into our bulk ferment. And then we want to do another coil fold after that. So that is going to be 1.5 hours into our bulk ferment. And here we have our timer. So 50 minutes from now, I'm going to do my first stretch and fold. Half an hour from now, 50 minutes after the first one, I'm going to do my second stretch and fold. Half an hour after the second stretch and fold, I'm going to do my first coil fold, so an hour into the process. And then half an hour after that, 1.5 hours into the bulk ferment, I'm going to do my second coil fold. And then 4 hours in total is when we're going to take the dough out and get it ready for shaping. That's how I like to keep track of this stuff. I used to just set non-discriminate timers. That doesn't fucking work. You forget where you are. You might think that you won't. You fucking will. And you'll over-ferment your dough and ruin your day. So keep track of it. This is a nice method of doing it. Once you get past the second coil fold, you got like 2 hours to fucking do whatever you want. So like go to your groceries, put a load of washing on. Call a friend, call your mother, call your grandmother. I don't know, just do something. Okay, so we are 15 minutes into our bulk ferment and it's time for our first stretch and fold. The first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna wet our hand. Just some water, doesn't need to be too much. Now, so what I like to do here is divide this into 8 points, so like an octagon, right? And then you wanna grab each one of those corners and just get underneath it and very gently pull it up and then just pull it back, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, right? The dough should resist you a little bit, particularly towards the last few, but that is it. That is a stretch and fold right there, and you'll be surprised how much more gluten that will develop, just that simple action. So we've done our first one of those. We're just gonna close this up again. We're just gonna put our lid back on there, and we're gonna do the exact same thing in 15 minutes as per our timer. Remember the timer? You do, that's what I admire about you. Okay, so we're half an hour into our bulk ferment now. We're gonna give it our second stretch and fold. Just wet the hand, and just like before again, divide it up into sort of the 8 sort of points. Give it a good pull. Ooh, it's getting nice and stretchy. Ooh, that's nice. That's getting real strong. Look at that. Look at that nice stretch. Just getting strong. Just getting powerful. The way it should. Do you see how it's like smooth? Do you see how it's sort of, like it's smooth and it's not even, like this is the raw hand, this is the unwetted hand. It's not even really that sticky anymore, right? It's developing gluten, it's developing dough strength. This is exactly where we want to be half an hour into our bulk ferment. Now, we're gonna cover that one back up and remember where we're at. So we've got another half hour and then we're gonna do a coil fold. Okay, so we are 1 hour into our 4-hour bulk ferment. It's time to do our first coil fold. Now, a coil fold is a much gentler kind of fold that leaves a nice sort of smooth top and rounded edges, which is gonna help start trapping gas. Right now, we've kind of got a lot of the gluten that we need. We just need to refine it a little bit more, organize it in a way that's gonna trap some of that gas, and then we're gonna start seeing some serious increases in volume over this bulk ferment. So, to do a coil fold, I'm just gonna wet both my hands. We need both hands for this one. I'm gonna grab each side and we're just gonna lift it up. The bowl's gonna come with you if it's a small amount like this, and that's fine. We're just gonna lift it up, let it stretch out, lift the whole thing up, and then just drop it down on itself and sort of pile it over, right? Then we're gonna rotate 90 degrees, do the exact thing again. See how that top's getting nice and smooth and taut? That's exactly what we're after. One more time, around the edges. Give it a little bit of a jiggle. See how it's extending itself less? Do you see how it's like getting to the point where it's getting stronger and it wants to stay together. It wants to be a nice ball of dough. Just like that, and that's our first coil fold. Now we're just gonna set it down gently, and you can already see nice smooth top, and it's starting to sort of dome. It's making a dome shape, right? It's not just this slack thing of dough anymore. It's making an organized shape. You know, that's what we want. Sign of good gluten development. Well done. So we're gonna cover this back up for another half hour, and then we're gonna do our second coil fold and our last fold. Okay, so it's been half an hour since our first coil fold. We're gonna do our second coil fold now. Ooh, that looks good. You can see we've got some bubbles and stuff coming in now. The fermentation's really active. This is coming along really nicely. Just like before, underneath, lift her up. Let the bowl come with it. Fuck it, why not? Why not? See, it's nice and stretchy. Let that up. Drop that back and let it coil on itself. Rotate it 90 degrees. Same again. Let that fall down. Same again. Let that fall down. And one more time. See how much tighter that got? See how much more that's in the thing? See how much tighter that got? Okay, so that's all of the hands-on work that we need to do. That's all of our folds done. We've established a ton of gluten. This is gonna ferment really beautifully. Now it just needs time to do that. So we're gonna cover this up and we're gonna leave it alone for the rest of our bulk ferment period, which should be about 2.5 hours. Now, being able to tell when a bulk ferment is done is like a little bit of an art in and of itself. Some people will wait for it to rise a certain period. Some people will tear a little piece off and keep it in some water so they can observe that on its own. I, in my personal opinion, think that there's no perfect method of doing it other than experience. At the end of the day, this is a skill that needs to be practiced. And this is the kind of thing that if you want to incorporate it into your life, I would recommend keeping like a practice journal, you know? Note down the temperature, note down the time that you started each part of the process. I have a journal where I did that exact same thing, and I'd have like the day's temperature, I'd have how long we bulk fermented it, how much culture, and then I'd have notes on whether or not the loaf came out, like what I liked about it and what I didn't like about it. I think, you know, I used to play a lot of instruments in the past, and I used to keep practice journals of stuff that I wanted to work on, stuff that I felt I was lacking, stuff that I felt that I was good at, you know. People who work out a lot will keep records of like their personal best, how they feel about a certain exercise, what muscle groups they're training. I don't think that this should be any different. This is a skill, and like all skills, if you practice it, you'll get better at it, and you might make a couple of loaves of bread that aren't that great, but I almost think that's a bit more rewarding than making great bread every time, because then you have something to improve on, you know? You learn more from a bad loaf than you do from a good loaf, in my opinion and my experience. I might just be saying that because I've made quite a few bad loaves in my time, and I need to justify that to myself. But I think that does hold water. Okay, so it's been 4 hours. Our bulk ferment time has elapsed, and as we can see, we've got some really gorgeous fermentation going on here. The top of our dough is mottled with all of these lovely little bubbles just to demonstrate that there's yeast activity going on. And an important thing to look for is that the dough is still domed, right? It hasn't collapsed in on itself, which it would have done if it had over fermented or we hadn't strengthened the dough enough. So we now need to move on to the pre-shaping stage, which means we need to get this dough out of the bowl, onto a bench, and ready to be worked with, to be coerced and shaped into its final shape. Coerced was a weird word to use there, wasn't it? I didn't like that, no. So this is just some plain flour. Just gonna dust the top of it. Don't wanna use too much, just enough that you can touch it without feeling gross and weird. A little bit on there and a little bit on the bench. Some's already there because this is my second attempt at filming this. Now the trick to this is you wanna release the edges with your fingertips, right? So floured fingertips. You want to just release those edges there. And then we want it to slide out and we want it to fall on its floured face, right? Yeah, there we are. There we go. There we go. There we have it, right? The face that is toward the counter, so the face that's face down on the counter, that face is not going to be sticky, the one that was exposed to air that we've just put some flour on. This underside though, this is gonna be quite sticky. Okay, so what we need to do now is pre-shape it. We've got this massive dough here. We've just pissed the gluten off by moving it around and fucking with it. So this side facing the bench, not gonna be sticky at all. I can touch that, that's no problem. This side up here, very sticky. That's gonna stick to me. And we're gonna use that to our advantage because dough sticks to dough. So remembering that thing that I said about the 8 points, and bringing them all towards the center. That's what we're gonna do here, right? So 1, into the center, go around, follow the shape. See how the dough is gonna stick to the dough, right? That's why you don't wanna use too much flour. You need to have some adhesion. People, I think, will touch the sticky surface accidentally or whatever, and then just be like, oh no, I need to drown this in flour. That's folly, don't do that. Right, so now we need to get this flipped over just like that. There we are. Now this is a bench scraper. You don't need to use one of these. You could just use your hands for this. You could just sort of tilt it around and just pull it in tightly like that and see how the surface is tensioning up. That's a good thing, we want that. Or you can lightly flour a bench scraper and do it in about 2 seconds by just sort of spinning it like this. Many ways to skin a cat. You don't need some of these tools. Some of these tools just make the job easier. Some of these tools, you know, you take them for granted when you have them, and then you don't know what to do when you don't. Cool, so that loose little boule here, I would call that pre-shaped. Now, this needs to rest. Any of these big bubbles on the top you can sort of pop if you want. Now this is gonna rest for about 20 minutes before we're gonna do our final shape. Okay, so our dough is rested, it's ready to go. It's been about 15 minutes now. As you can see, it's slackened off, but it's still holding its shape. Good sign of gluten development, well done. I appreciate you. Now, we need to get it shaped. We need to do our final bit of shaping. Now, personally, if you ask me, this is the most nail-biting part of the whole process. You can spend, what, like 5 hours is what we've done on this so far, plus the time that we spent last night. You could get to shaping and you could completely bottle it. That's why practice is really important, and I would also recommend practicing on some like yeasted breads, some like lower commitment bulk fermented stuff, just to get your hands used to feeling the dough and the shape that we want it. Now, we washed our bowl earlier because we're gonna use this as a proofing vessel. These are bannetons. They're usually made of timber, sometimes made of plastic, and they're a little basket that holds and supports your dough after it's been shaped so it can proof in. Traditionally, the dough would stay in this all the way to the point where it's being dumped out, scored, and ready for baking. Now, because our mixing bowl is round, we're kind of locked into making a boule. That's okay, boules are fantastic. Let's turn this into a boule. First thing that we need to do, just a tiny bit of flour on the top, tiny bit, not much at all, right? We're gonna need this to still be able to grab the bench. We do want a degree of stickage. So we're gonna use our scraper, or you could just manhandle it if you wanted to. I'm just gonna use a scraper, just to flip it over, just like that. One quick, clean motion. And then it's the same as all of the other times we've been pulling the dough. We're gonna imagine our 8 points. Remember, underside, not gonna be sticky, right? The bit that's been exposed to the air and has got flour on it, not sticky. So 1, 2, 3, just keeping that tension down in the middle there. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Flipped back over. Right, so we've got this. It's a little bit tighter than it was before. As you can see, it's standing a wee bit taller. Now, I like to get a little bit of flour on like the blade of my hand, like that. And we're just gonna pull it towards us, and you see how that top is tightening? I'll reset it. Pull it towards us. And we need it to have a certain level of adhesion to the bench so it can sort of bunch up and that outer skin can become nice and tight. And see, that's getting nice and tall. It's standing exactly the way that it should. And I would call that done. There you go. That's your boule. Don't touch it anymore. You fucking leave it alone. Yeah? Don't be doing that all day, because the heat from your hands will transfer into it and you'll fuck it up. I said that because I've done that many times. If we just dump this in here, it's gonna stick, you'll fuck your day, ruin all your hard work. Don't do that. This is a clean kitchen towel. I know it looks a bit gross. It's just stained. It is clean, I promise. Get that in there, push that down to the bottom. I think you guys can already see where we're going with this, but just in case you can't, liberally dust the cloth with flour. Liberally. Don't be conservative on this. Liberally dust it with flour. And put a little bit of flour on the dough too, just to be sure. Because again, like, if you think about the time you've invested in this, if you fuck it up now, what are you gonna tell everybody? The last thing we've gotta do is we just gotta get our dough into here with one foul swoop. Unfortunately, like, I'm right-handed, so I'm gonna do it this way. Lift and dump. Cool. Job's a good one. Job is a good one. You guys see that? Job? Good one. So that's gonna support our dough while it proofs. Proofing is the final rising stage. Now, we've discussed this a couple of times on this channel before, but proofing is a window, right? So you'd have underproofed on this side, you've had functionally proofed here, and then you'd have overproofed on this side. That window of functionally proofed, some people like things more towards underproof, some people like things slightly more overproof, some people like things all range of the spectrum. Make a bunch of bread and you'll figure out what you like. Either way, this is the last chance for our yeast in here to consume some sugar, make a little bit of extra gas, and it's gonna give us the bubble and rise that we want out of this bread. Now, traditionally with like a make-at-home sourdough, this is done overnight in the fridge. That's a very popular thing, it's a very trendy thing. You would cover this up, you would seal this up, and you would put it in the fridge overnight. We are gonna do that. That's a thing that we are gonna do. But first of all, what we're gonna do is leave this for about half an hour at room temperature, and then we're gonna throw it in the fridge. So it's gonna have a little bit of time at room temperature. Now that that gluten's all arranged the way that we want it to, it's gonna produce a little bit of gas at room temperature and this nice warmth, and then it's gonna go in the fridge overnight. And as the temperature goes down, the fermentation is gonna slow, and it's gonna get really, really slow until it's almost stopped, because that fridge is running at about 4 degrees. Once it gets to about that temperature, that fermentation, it's basically gonna stop. We haven't halted it, but we've slowed it to the point where we can make it adhere to our schedule. So it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon now. I'm probably not gonna bake this until about 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. You have a window. Generally speaking, I have found that this will take at least 16 hours in the fridge. But you can hold it to about 48. I wouldn't push it past that, but you can hold it to 48. So what I'm gonna do now, this is a freezer bag. I would put the whole thing in there, but it's not big enough and I didn't think that far ahead. So I'm just gonna lay this over the top just to create a slightly better seal. And I'm gonna take our trusty sheet pan and I'm just gonna cover it like that. I'm gonna set a timer for half an hour, and then I'm gonna put it in the fridge, and I'm gonna forget about it until I can get home from work, preheat my oven tomorrow, and get baking. That's the hard bit done. The shaping bit, that's the worst bit. We're done now. Good job. You did great. I know you did great. If you didn't do great, you'll do great next time. Don't worry about it. It's just bread. The stakes are not high. Hello and welcome to day 3. This is a good day. This is a very good day. We've done all the work. It's time to finally bake our bread. We haven't done all the work. There's still a little bit of work to do, but we're ready to bake our bread. It's baking day. It's been nearly 24 hours. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon now. I went to work this morning. I fucked around for a bit. Here we are, it's 2 o'clock now. We're gonna bake our bread. Okay, so in regards to like oven heat and temperature, generally speaking, relatively high hydration artisanal bread like this that doesn't have sugar added as an ingredient will like a really high heat. So I've got my oven preheated to about 220 degrees. That's pretty hot for this oven, it's kind of a piece of shit. But it does have one benefit for this sort of thing in that it's very bottom focused on the heat. I think the only heating element in it is in the bottom. Now in a big dog bakery, they would use what's called a slab oven or a deck oven or like a brick oven or something like that, that has a thick slab of stone or steel or something that retains heat really well, that would absorb a ton of that heat and pump a lot of heat directly into the bottom of it. I have a baking steel. I'm not using it for this video because we want to keep it fairly minimalist. I have used it in previous sourdough and just like baking in general videos. We're going to do a couple of fun things with the baking in this to guarantee slightly closer to like proper Bakehouse results. Cool. So here is our proofed up dough. Got some nice air in there. We're liking it. More importantly, it's nice and rigid. Right? We're baking this directly from cold. I have just pulled this out of the fridge. We need to do a couple of things that will involve a little bit of light roughhousing, but that's okay because the dough is much better at handling roughhousing when it's cold. So if this is the first time you've ever done this, there's a couple of things that I want you to have ready and on hand. The first is a square of baking paper or parchment paper or whatever you want to call it. The other is something relatively sharp and relatively fine. This is just a steak knife. This is what I'm going to use to score our bread. What is scoring? We're going to get to that now. But the first thing that we need to do is get our dough out of this bowl. So how we're going to do that is we're going to take our baking paper and we're going to push it almost flat against our dough, right? Almost flat against it there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to support the dough as we gently turn it out onto the paper, making sure that we're not going to lose the tea towel and have the whole thing come crumbling down. Just like that. There we go. There we are. There's our dough there. The reason that we want to have this all in hand is because we want to work relatively quickly with this. We've got our dough here. We need to do what's called scoring it. As this goes into the oven, the yeast in it is going to go on a bit of a feeding frenzy. It's going to eat a ton of sugar and it's going to shit out a ton of gas, right? That's going to give us that oven spring, that rise, right? If we just put it in there like this, it's going to burst open in whatever the weakest spot is, and aesthetically, sometimes it's what you're going for. Today, that's not what we're going for. So we're going to score it to provide weak points to break the surface tension to control the way it's going to expand. Hundreds of different ways to do this. This is how I'm going to do it for this one. I'm just going to pretend I'm drawing a little noughts and crosses board. 1, 2, or tic-tac-toe, whatever you want to call it. Cool. Don't overthink this. Do not overthink this. Don't lose your mind over this. The second thing that we need to do is we need to take our mixing bowl and we need to cover this, right? As this grows and expand, the crust is going to harden over, and that is going to limit our expansion if it hardens over before the yeast is finished feeding. What keeping this bowl over the top does, as that water evaporates and turns into steam, it's going to seal that steam in there and keep that crust nice and gelatinous so it can spring to the fullest extent. It's not essential, but it's very heavily recommended, you know? We very heavily recommend doing that. And then this is about to go into our 220-degree oven. We have been preheating it for about an hour, so it's good and hot and definitely at the temperature that we want it to. This is the time. We're doing the bake now. Get excited. There's a sticker on the bottom of this mixing bowl. It's about to meet its god. And just like that, our minimalist sourdough is in the oven. We're gonna let that go for about 15 minutes with the lid on. After that 15 minutes, we're gonna take that lid off and we're gonna drop our temperature from 220 down to about 200. And then we're just gonna bake it until it's got the color that we really like, until it's got that nice, deep, rich golden brown and it smells amazing. Okay, so it's been 15 minutes. We're going to pull our sourdough out and remove the bowl lid so it can finish browning up. And we're also gonna drop our oven temperature down from 220 to about 200 degrees. Now it goes without saying, this whole mess is really fucking hot. So be very careful, very, very careful. Hey, how about that? Nice wee bit of spring there. Now, as you can see, that crust is still gelatinous, so that's probably gonna spring a little bit further even. So our little home steaming method has worked a treat. But you can see how it's like really puffed up over those lines and stuff, how it's really pushed those out and really solidified that shape. This is gonna go back in the oven now until I say so. I personally like to bake my sourdoughs fairly dark. what I'm gonna start doing is checking it at about 10-minute intervals, and then as it gets closer, about 5-minute intervals. So this beautiful bulbous young man is going back into the oven for at least 10 minutes, probably about half an hour based on, you know, me doing this previously. But I am very happy with how that sprung. It's a nice shape too, considering it proofed in a fucking mixing bowl. Can I be super honest and say I didn't think that was gonna work as well as it did? Okay, so our sourdough's been baking for probably about another half hour. I gave it a little rotate halfway through just because my oven is woefully uneven. Anyway, we're ready to finally take it out. Yeah, boys. Have a look at that. Cool, good way of telling if it's done. Nice and hollow sort of thump on the bottom there. Isn't that beautiful? Lovely, look, no equipment sourdough, right? No equipment at all. You ever see Ratatouille? Only good bread sounds this way. Now, the really unfortunate thing about this is that we do need to wait for this to fully cool before we can slice into it. I know it smells really good, and it's really crackly, and it's really crunchy, and it seems really delightful, and you just want to like rip into it, but like, we need to wait for this to fully cool before you can slice into it, or you will ruin the shelf life and the texture of your loaf. You'll get a nice few gummy, warm bites, and then the novelty will wear off, and then your loaf will dry out and be shitty, and you'll not have wasted a bunch of time. If you enjoy eating hot bread and you're gonna eat the whole thing, or you've got people over and you're gonna eat the whole thing, go to town. See these blisters here? Like these little micro blisters on top? They're not even that micro, some of them are quite large. That's a sign of really good fermentation. That's a sign that this has been really well fermented. It sprung really well. It's got a nice like bit of height on it, considering the overall weight. So there is our minimalist sourdough. No equipment sourdough, just a mixing bowl, a sheet pan, and a dream. Okay, so it's been a couple of hours and this is properly cooled. So we're gonna slice it open now and see how we did. This is always the fun little moment of truth whenever we get to this stage. Good little crackle there. Oh God. Ooh! Fortunately, a guy who makes bread for a living has a really shit bread knife. Recommend me a new one in the comments below. Let's see if that works. Let's see if that gets any engagement. So as we can see, we've actually got quite a nice, beautiful sort of open crumb, which I don't think is too bad considering it proofed up in a fucking mixing bowl. Color me surprised. Interest of full disclosure, I 100% wasn't expecting that to work as well as it did. So in regards to like things that we're looking for here, we've got an open crumb, but it's not like insane. Like there's no big old tunneling holes. There's not like one big fucking pocket of air kind of ruining everything. And it's also, it's not gummy or like stodgy or anything like that. So you know it's properly cooked. All of like the good signs of good fermentation are there. You've got your little like micro blisters that you can actually just smash them with your thumb if you want. It's very satisfying. It's like popping bubble wrap. You've got like a nice open crumb, but again, it's not insane. There's a few larger holes, there's a few smaller holes. There's an irregularity to it, but there's also a pattern, if that makes sense. You know, like there's a consistency to it and also like a little bit of wildness. I tend to find that when you're drifting on the scale of like super open, super kind of crazy and a little bit wild, I tend to find that it looks really pretty and it's really nice to just like eat on its own. But when you use it practically, I kind of prefer this sort of level, which I mean, this is why I make them this way. I would happily call this like a good sourdough. You know, I would happily call this a good one, regardless of the lack of equipment or not. I would be happy to make this, present it for somebody. Here's your sourdough, have a good day, sweet. Thank you so much for watching this strange little experiment that I decided to conduct one day. One of the main focuses of what I'm trying to do with this channel and the content that I make and stuff like that is make things accessible. And I think that if you wanna learn how to make sourdough, if that's like a thing that you wanna do, I don't think it should cost a lot of money. I think it should be the kind of thing that you should be able to make it work. There should be that degree of accessibility that you can make it work with stuff that you have in your kitchen. And I would encourage anyone to definitely do that. If you have a friend with a culture or something like that, if you can get your hands on a little rye Montgomery or something like that, then I would 100% encourage experimenting with it and like seeing how you go and whether or not you like the process before you commit to buying stuff. You know, like I've got a couple of Dutch ovens, I've got a couple of bannetons, I've got a couple of like scoring alarms. All of them cost money. and a lot of them weren't cheap. That mixing bowl over there I've had for eons. These hands I've had since I was born. So I personally think that if you want to take the plunge and you're maybe on the fence and you keep watching videos about sourdough but you never actually make it yourself, I would encourage you to try something like this, because if you can make this work with those rudimentary tools, you could make it fucking work with anything. But yeah, thank you so much for watching Bradley's Bakehouse. Subscribe if that's a thing that you feel like doing. And let me know what you thought of this little experiment. I had fun. You might not have fun. I'm gonna eat half of this now, so.